I met Allison on TikTok and I saw her promoting her content originally about her first book and then about her newest novel coming out. And the title, of course, grabbed me because I grew up around addiction. I have two brothers who were deep into addiction, one who passed away and
Mm.
one who has struggled his whole life. So it's definitely a topic I hold near and dear to my heart and know that it is complex for everyone involved. And, this show is about all types of grief, but I think what happens around addiction is so often not spoken about. It is a kind of grief that many people in our country experience, in our world experience, but don't openly process together, I don't think. So I was happy to see that that is a theme in your book, and I can't wait to talk to you about it. So, yeah, if you do you want to give us like a short synopsis of what the novel's about?
Sure, I can definitely do that. And thank you for sharing about, your family and your brother. And I'm sorry to hear about all of it.
Yeah.
It seems that the more I talk about this book, the more people there are that just, oh, I have, my brother, my mom, my dad, everybody has stories in some way or another. There are a few people have left reviews that said, fortunately, my life has not been touched by addiction, but it is very few and far between. So my book, The Things We Cannot Change, a story about the ghosts created by addiction, is a fictionalized version of my own story. Like we mentioned, growing up with and losing my dad to alcoholism. So in the book, Callie, the main character, is 18. She's in her first year of college, and she is 1 year out from the passing of her father to alcoholism. And she is doing her very best to put everything behind her, to kind of forget everything, to avoid the topic, to just move on with her life and not think about that part of her life anymore. She obviously has a lot of very complicated feelings about their life together, but she's really trying to just bury them away. But her subconscious is not allowing it. She's having a lot of nightmares. And eventually her mom guilts her into coming home for a visit, which she has also been avoiding. And when she heads home, she comes face to face with the ghost of her father. And so the book centers around kind of their story, her kind of coming to terms with him being there, what it means that he's there, how can she get rid of him, pretty much is her primary focus at first. And then coming to terms with all the complicated feelings she's had about their life together and his death.
Wow. Definitely sounds so needed. You said that so many readers have said they've had a similar experience. And
Mm-hmm.
I am so curious because you've mentioned that this is the inspiration is drawn from your own personal experiences and your own life, but it is a fictionalized version. I'm curious as a writer, what made you choose to fictionalize your story rather than write it as a memoir? And what went into that decision? Did you ever consider doing it the other way?
Yeah, so I've always known I've been a writer forever, and I've always known that I was a writer since before I could actually even write. And so I think when you're coming from that place where you've always known you're going to do some sort of creative endeavor, and you also have this experience, eventually you will write about it, or whatever you do. If you write music, you'll eventually address it in some way through your art, whatever that is. So I always knew that would probably happen. I have always written fiction. That's just always what I've enjoyed writing and what I started publishing before this story was ready to come out. I toyed with the idea of, once I was ready to start thinking about what a story about this would look like, I toyed with the idea of kind of a collection of stories, because that's what I was writing when I first started publishing, was short stories. I have a couple of collections of flash fiction, so I thought maybe I could present it in like just a collection of either essays or stories, something like that. But the more I started kind of writing for local events where people were being very bold and sharing their own personal stories, whether about addiction or just anything
Mhm.
personal, I started writing more of this story kind of on my own. And I realized that by kind of fictionalizing it and writing about it as though it were happening to someone else or from the eyes of a character, it made it easier to write about. I think some people just aren't ready to even journal about their feelings, especially when it comes to the complicated feelings that come with losing a loved one or having a loved one with addiction. I didn't even journal about it. I've always known I wanted to be a writer, but if you look back through my journals from when I was a kid, you would never know that I was going through this experience. And it wasn't until college. So my dad actually passed when I was 15. And the first time I wrote about it was in college. And I wrote, I mean, it was again a fictionalized version, but of real life. And my creative writing professor was very astute when he said, this feels a little nonfiction. So it was just kind of sitting there at the surface, just ready to get out. And so that aspect of it, that writing it as though it were a fictional story, really helped me kind of process a lot of those things. And it started to come out in short stories or short pieces slowly, like from college on. And by the time I was actually ready to sit down and write the book, I had realized that fiction was the way to go to do that, because I had written fiction. I enjoy writing fiction. And I kind of had the idea for a road trip story, like with the ghost and the daughter. That kind of, obviously it transformed and it changed and all these things kind of to get to what came out. But yeah, so it's a very long-winded answer to say
okay.
that's how I ended up writing fiction.
I love that. I think it really goes to show that sometimes with grief and loss, we hear very prescriptive things told to people, like you should journal. And I agree with you. I'm also a writer, and I didn't journal about my loss hardly at all. And so I think for some people, it's such a wonderful outlet. And if it works for you, then I think you should absolutely lean into that. But if it doesn't, I don't think anyone should beat themselves up about it, because I think these things process in different ways and they come out in different ways. And so I write memoir and you're writing fiction. And I think it's just so beautiful that you can take an experience and you can process it and create with it in all different forms. And I just think it's a great example. I feel like I don't talk, most of the people I interview who write are writing nonfiction or memoir. And so I love to be able to talk to someone who is drawing from life experience, as we all do, but using that towards fiction. So in the same realm, I would love to hear a little bit about your dad and your experience with addiction, if you are comfortable sharing, and what that was like for you.
Yeah. So pre me, my dad was a very talented musician. He had actually, I have a lot of articles and records and playbills and things. He was in theater groups. He played with Elvis's band. He headlined the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. If you're from Michigan or the surrounding areas, that's a big deal. Played at the Republican National Convention. So he had a very promising career ahead of him. By the time, I think even by the time I was born, he had already been drinking quite a bit. He was pretty far into his addiction. I think he wrote in his journals that he drank for a long time before he realized he had a problem, which I think is probably very common. So that by the time I was around and old enough to remember, that unfortunately was the dad I knew. I didn't get to experience a little bit here and there when he had, sober stints. But I learned later in life that really, when I was talking to my mom, and I'm like, talking about how I have such a hard time remembering, when he wasn't drinking, I found out that he really wasn't sober for probably more than 9 months at a time. And so at least that made sense in my mind. At least I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense then. Right. So so then my experience was basically that person. I got to hear stories, how he was, really kind, and I experienced some of that, and, never met a stranger, and was a great performer because he was so personable. And I saw him perform here and there a little bit when I was young, but I never got to experience that side of him. And I was lucky in that he was not violent, like so many people unfortunately experience. And I actually talk a little bit about that in the book and in some musical pieces that are in the book that we can touch on.
Yeah.
That he talks about his experience with his dad, and his dad was violent with him and his family. He wasn't, I don't think he drank, but, and so I think he was very aware of that. And even though he made obviously some wrong choices, that was something he never did. And so I was lucky in that area, but, and he tried. And I think later in life, I could look back and see the moments, where he was trying. And I think by the time I was old enough to accept those moments, I was definitely not going to because
Yeah.
I was just done with it.
I mean, 15 is a hard age to lose someone. It's your
Mm-hmm,
developmental stage where you're still figuring out who you are and who you're going to be. And I think it's common, even with no issues in the house, teens rebel against their parents or don't have a great relationship sometimes during those like adolescent years. And so I'm sure
mm-hmm,
with like this added layer, it makes it much more difficult. I know that
mm-hmm.
you have said your dad kept journals and that I believe he went into rehab at least once or maybe more. Did you, when you were growing up, know that that's what was happening, that he was going to rehab and trying to get better, or did you not really have an understanding of that?
I did, and some of my well, one of my very first memories, and I even talk about this in the book, is I think I don't know, we were at home and my dad answered the phone and was talking for a minute, and then he was like, "Here, your cousin wants to talk to you." And I picked up the phone, and the very first thing she said to me was, "Your dad's drunk again." And I was like 5.
Oh,
So
wow.
very early,
Yeah.
I understood. Well, I didn't understand probably at that point, but I knew the word. I knew
Hmm.
that he had moments where he was very different. And I do remember, driving him, being in the car, taking him to rehab or going to visit him at all these different facilities. So it was definitely more than once or twice. I think by the time he turned 40, he'd been in and out multiple times.
Yeah.
But so I do remember, and I do remember that being understanding that that's what was happening.
So once he passed away, when did you read his journals? Was it much later, like once you were into adulthood? And how did you make the decision to read them? I've talked about this with other guests and had my own experience with journals, and it's a very private thing for people. Like, we don't write journals for other people to read, right? Like, we write books that we expect other
Mm-hmm.
people to read. But I think when people are journaling, it's a different experience. And I know for myself, when I read my brother's journal, I felt like I was invading his privacy, but I also felt this craving to really know him better than, or know other aspects of him that I hadn't known before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read his journals very quickly after he passed, whereas somebody else I interviewed, she said that she waited years before she was
Mm-hmm.
ready to open them and read them. So I'm just curious what your experience was with that, and did you have to take breaks from reading them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Actually, I don't know how long it was between like when I had them or got them and when I started reading them, because I think my mom had them for a long time. I was definitely in college or after college. It was after college. And honestly, I think I had moved like back home with my mom for just a little bit. And so I think that's when she had them at home. And so I think that's when she told me she had them and she gave them to me. And I think I probably did read them right away. I think there was an element, like you mentioned, of like that craving to like know more.
Mhm.
I think for a long time I wanted an explanation. And I thought maybe reading those would get me that. I thought I could, find one entry that like explained everything. And I would be like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Like, I at least, it stinks that he's gone, but at least I understand now. And as a writer, and I knew he was creative and I was a writer. So I think there was also that sense of writers don't always have a lot of private writings. Like we
Yeah.
generally write with the intention of like you were saying, the
Mhm.
intention of other people reading it. So even though they were journals, they did have a lot of like scribbles, poems, things he'd also written. So I didn't have that quite sense of like breaking his privacy because I knew that he was a writer who, had every intention of letting other people read his work. Maybe never me and that those, writings in particular, but I did read them pretty quickly, I think, with that in mind, that, really wanting an answer. And that was actually going to be kind of the original plot of the book, was the main character not acknowledging that her dad died due to the alcoholism, but like going on a mission to find out what happened to him and getting like an explanation, because she didn't want the explanation that was given to her. So it was kind of going to be like a mystery road trip with them going on this mystery to figure out what happened to him, because that was basically me. Like, I wanted to know what happened, what took this person with such a promising career to where he ended up. And unfortunately, there's no answers.
Right.
And
it's so frustrating. I wish there were answers too.
And I think that's, again, a common thing with addiction, is we just never get the answers that we want. We never get the closure that we want. And that's a huge theme in the book as well.
And I know on TikTok, I saw you made a video about some of your dad's writings, and that he had written as a exercise in rehab, I believe, that he wrote his own eulogy or versions of his eulogy, which, can I just say, I was fascinated that is an exercise that people were doing. I don't know. I have to think more deeply about how I feel about that. And I wonder how that was to read for you. And also just makes me think of this concept of like, we'll never understand really what they're going through and what is driving it, because when you're not in that world of addiction, it's easy to think like, don't you love us enough to stop? And, can't you just see all of these things that you have going for you? You say your dad is like this successful musician, and you want so much for that to be enough for him to stop, and it wasn't. So I guess I was just curious about the eulogy part. It seems so powerful that was in there.
Yeah, that was, and I think I probably discovered those right away. Like I think there were different things. It was just a box. I think there were different things in that box that affected me at different times. I think maybe the first time I read them, I didn't, think anything of them, or I just didn't look at them. But eventually those were some of the pieces that really kind of impacted me and got to me through my grief. I get to a point where I kind of like shut down and I don't get emotional about things, but at different points in my life, different things in that box has caused me to become emotional. And at one point, those were the things that did it. Specifically, there's a line, and I think I mentioned this in the video you were talking about, how could somebody with such a promising career like do these things? And I think this one line kind of gave me a little clarity, because when you're missing other things, those things aren't going to matter as much. And I feel like that's what happened to him. There's a line that just says, in the version where he kicks the addiction and lives a long life, and he's passing away like 78 or something, there's a line that says, he never became a singing star. Instead, he became whole.
Wow. Yeah.
And that one, even out, like that line, got me for a long time. And I think it says a lot about the addict's brain and thought process and mental state, is that they just want to feel whole, but there's just something that's holding them back from feeling that way. And I could never pretend to understand what that feels like, but I think it's important to at least attempt to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that your dad was a musician, and so he's a creative and an artist, but in a different way from you, because you're also an artist and a creator, but you have a different form. Have you, as you've gotten older and published books, thought about that connection to your dad and like in the creative way, that like that was a piece of him that he gave you?
Yeah. It's come up a lot, because he was a writer as well. He wrote his own music and lyrics. So he helped me. I do think that's something if, things had been different, we would have really been able to connect on. He helped me write a couple stories when I was little. I have a couple of them, like about a bunny in the backyard and a cat our cat, or a little girl that hears really scary noises in the middle of the night, and it turns out just to be the cat. So they're in his handwriting, but I think we wrote them together. And I've thought about that as my writing journey has progressed and this story has started to come out, that, he also wanted to be able to use his words to touch people, to help people. Some of his music has really strong messages about, loving each other and a lot of the things he was going through. One of his more popular songs is called Run for Your Brother. And it's actually linked in the book, so you can listen to it on YouTube and actually hear him singing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, he really wanted to reach people with his messages. And so I think I don't take it lightly that I am able to do that and maybe use some of his messaging and some of his experience to reach people in a way that he was never able to. Well, I'm sure he did, but beyond what he was able to.
Right, to carry it forward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so curious about how you incorporated music into your book. Can you talk a little bit about that? You mentioned this earlier too, so I'm curious to hear more about it.
Yeah. So because I have his lyrics to some of his songs and I have a lot of his writings, I was able to kind of combine some of ours. So there's a couple pieces. There's one that actually, I mentioned the piece I wrote in college. That was actually one of the first things I wrote, and it developed into one of the opening scenes in the book. But I took that at one point and I put some of his song lyrics in it and kind of like wrote my narrative. And then I put some of his song lyrics in, and then my narrative and some of his song lyrics. And my brother sings those. He got some of his musical ability and kind of took on that part of the family tradition. So he sings and plays guitar, and he sang the pieces. He sang the lyrics, and I read the piece and he sang and put some music to it, and we turned that into kind of a recording.
Wow.
We've also performed that piece live a couple of times at different events at the launch party. And so that's in the book. And then there's a piece that my dad wrote about his dad, just like a quick little paragraph about his dad. So I turned it into kind of like a call and response type of back and forth. His line was, "Don't get me wrong, my dad was not a complete bastard. He just acted that way most of the time." And I said, "Don't get me wrong, my dad was not a complete bastard. He was just drunk most of the time." And so, turn that in. And that is a piece in the book as well. So there are QR codes that you can only get to if you have the book. You can get them in the ebook too. You can buy the ebook at the end of some of the chapters.
That.
And I did try to correlate them with the chapters that they went to. So at the end of the scene, this is the song that goes with kind of that scene.
Oh, wow. So cool.
Yeah. So it's a multimedia experience.
And that is so interesting, the way that you took his writing and incorporated your own. And he's talking about his dad, because it makes me think of intergenerational trauma and the way that these types of things sort of roll through families in different ways. They come up and look differently, but like we're all carrying our past with us. And unfortunately, like we're carrying it with us, and then we're having our own families, and some is trickling down to them. And so it's such a beautiful artistic way of showing that.
Yeah, and I address that in that piece pretty heavily, obviously, and then in the book itself, like they have conversations about that. And
so I'm curious how your family reacted. Like, did they know that you were writing it, and did they read it prior to publication? And how have they been feeling about the whole thing?
Yeah. So I told my mom a long time ago, obviously, that I was going to write a book about this. Like, I think a while back, it was going to be the nonfiction kind of collection. And I told her then that I was probably going to do it. But I think what she said when I first told her I'd probably write a book about it was, "Well, I hope I'm dead when you do." Luckily, she is not.
Yes.
She is here, and she read it, and she hates it when I share this story, but of course every interview I do about this is going to have this story in it. The biggest critique she had after the first time she read it was that she came off too good.
Oh, wow.
She was not happy. She's like, I made mistakes too. Maybe I shouldn't have let him stay. And, I know it wasn't easy on you guys. And like, I know that, but this is my story. And like, it's how I saw things. And to me, she was the constant. She was the comfortable constant when things were very uncertain. And because it's my story, I get to talk about how I saw her.
Yeah.
But I did use that. So she read a draft of it and she told me that. And I did actually kind of address that in the book. I added to one of the conversations between the mom and the daughter and kind of included a little bit of that sentiment in the conversation. So it did help feed the story. And then my brother read it as well. Those were the two family members that I let read it. I mean, they weren't the biggest affected because they had the biggest roles in the book besides me. So I mostly just let them read it to make sure they were okay with like things I mentioned or didn't mention. And they were both, besides my mom's one critique, they were both fine with it.
Yeah. And it sounds like your brother is involved for your launch party and performed with you. And what a beautiful thing to bring you guys all together again. And not that you're not together, but to, bring you together around this topic, I guess. So how was writing this book different from writing your first book? Was your first book based on your actual life or was that completely fictionalized?
No, so my first book is completely fiction. It takes place in Neverland. So unfortunately, I have never been to Neverland.
Darn.
No. Never stumbled across Peter or any fairy dust, but maybe in my dreams. But the first book, I feel like I just knew I needed to get a completely fictional, fun, and it's not 100% fun. It is also about a young girl with a terminal illness. So I tend to lean toward the heavy-handed topics, but it still has Neverland and, pirates and lost boys and fairies. So there are fun elements to it. And I knew I needed to get something like that, I think, out of my system first before I dove into this book. But I think either before I was done or like mid-launch or something, I think by the time this book was out there, I knew that the book about my dad would be the next one. I think I knew that I couldn't keep writing fictional books until I kind of got that one. But my intention has always been to write fiction. I've never wanted really, besides the story, to do nonfiction or anything like that. So besides this one, everything else I intend to write is probably, you never know.
You never know.
Probably going to be fiction.
Well, I so appreciate that this is out there for people. I think for families, there are a lot of nonfiction books out there, but there is a different feel when you pick up a novel and it can feel a little just like, I want to just get lost in a story, but then it has this resonation with your own experience. And there's such a need for that, as we both know. It's so prevalent, whether it's alcohol or drugs or something else. Before we wrap up, do you have any advice for listeners who are grieving either someone who they've lost to addiction or someone they're estranged from due to addiction?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would just say that it's okay to be mad. And you're probably always going to be a little mad. I did a TikTok that said, if what happened in the book happened today and my dad showed up in front of me, I would probably have the exact same reaction as the book, or as I might have at 15 or 20. I'd be, I probably wouldn't want to talk right away and I'd be mad. And I think that's okay. And I honestly think that my dad would say it was okay and he would understand. And just know that that might never go away. You can have all the feelings. You can, miss them and grieve for the life that they didn't have or that they're missing and still be mad at them. And I think that that's a hard thing to accept, that guilt and that anger, and that it never goes away, but it might not, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think anger and guilt are two of the things that we don't talk about often as very normal responses and some of the most challenging to work through, particularly when it comes to addiction. I think guilt is something we always think like, was there something else I could have done? Was I too harsh with them? If, you went the tough love route and you weren't angry and you expressed it and then they pass away and like you hadn't repaired your relationship or something, like there's always these layers and layers of guilt when it comes to someone who has addiction. So I think you giving that permission to people who are having all the feelings, that's totally normal and it's totally okay. And, as hard as we try, you could do everything and we just can't. You can't control somebody else's behavior and you can't change the outcomes that have happened. And I love that you gave that reminder because people need to hear it.
You don't need my permission to feel the anger, but you have the general,
yes,
the general permission from the entire community to feel that.
Absolutely. How has it been?
The response has been really amazing. I haven't gotten a ton of response from new readers yet because they just got it, but the response from my launch team was really amazing.
I really appreciate talking to you. I love talking to other family members who've had similar experiences. And I know that so many listeners have been through something similar. We know it's a huge epidemic in our country with alcohol and drugs, and it has such a far-reaching impact that's not only on the person who's using or who passes away, but also on everyone in their close vicinity. And it's been so lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.